You're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy Focus.
Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football presented by Boost Mobile. My name is Daniel Dopp, here with Stephania Bell and Field Late Yates, like we always do. Field Lates. Yeah, right, like you're ever late to anything. If you're 15 minutes early, you're late, Field. That's how you roll with everything you do.
Well, with Tom Coughlin.
Yeah.
Not from like a physical standpoint of like being able to contribute on the team, but I would show up to the meetings on time, even by Tom's very early standards.
Yes, you would. Absolutely.
Coach Coughlin, I should call him.
Very exciting show today. We're going to give you our biggest Week 6 takeaways, as well as talking about some studs and duds from the week, guys that either overperformed or underperformed.
You okay? Your eyes are a little watery.
Are they?
You've been crying?
A little bit.
Okay.
It's a tough
Tears
day.
of joy combined with tears of sadness?
It's one of those
A
things.
lot of tears, I guess.
It was an emotional roller coaster for me yesterday after the Lions just unbelievably dominated the Dallas Cowboys, but unfortunately lost my guy Aiden Hutchinson for what feels like the season. And it's just one of those brutal injuries that you just – I wish this was a Madden video game. I would have just shut the game off in the middle and just restarted.
Started the whole console, right?
Reboot.
They call that a Pyrrhic victory, I believe is the term, right, Stefan?
Yes.
You win the battle, you lose the war, or vice versa, one of those things.
Something like that.
Didn't feel great. Didn't feel great.
But a huge dominant win, and your offense is so good that despite losing maybe the best defensive player in football this year, you guys still very much have a chance in the most ridiculous division of all time.
Dude, the NFC North is a juggernaut. When did that happen?
I don't know.
When we were talking about topics for the podcast, and I didn't understand the assignment right away because I didn't know it was about players. I thought it was like, what's your takeaway? And I was like, NFC North is the best division in football, real football, and fantasy football. Yeah. Like, it's delivering on all counts.
Every single level, yeah. I just wish that they would have let the Lions have like a year or two with everyone else being bad for a little bit. But nope, everyone's really good. So
Well, not everyone.
That one out.
As they are proving.
Well, yes, we'll see how this works out. But it's going to be a very fun show today. We're going to dive into a handful of topics that I think will be a good time. So let's just kick it off with our biggest Week 6 takeaways. Each one of us bringing a takeaway to the table. Phil Jace, why don't we start with you?
Caleb Williams is soaring right now, Daniel. Back-to-back weeks as a top 6 quarterback. As a matter of fact, he is now quarterback 1 on the week pending Monday Night Football. So 2 players, and Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers, with a chance to unseat Caleb Williams, but they're going to have to be very, very good. His 28.64 fantasy points for Caleb Williams yesterday put on a show in Jacksonville. Last week, very good as well as a top 6 scoring quarterback. And here's what I think is most important here is that I don't know that Caleb Williams was an obvious start in most people's eyes going into yesterday. The Bears now go into their bye next week. They're going to come back from London, have a chance to rest, and this might have value for the next month beyond that. Because you take a look at Caleb Williams' schedule on the backside of the bye. In the next 4 games after it, you guys tell me if there is a matchup that scares you to the point that you will be saying to yourself, Caleb Williams continues to trend up, which I'm going to describe in just a moment. You'd say, I don't know if I can do it. At the Commanders.
Definitely, I'm okay.
Baker
with that,
Mayfield's had nearly 300 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Lamar Jackson threw for over 300 yards. Joe Burrow threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. You're cool with that matchup.
Yep.
The Cardinals, a team that they're a confusing one, but I don't think they scare you right now as a pass defense.
Nope.
And he draws back-to-back games at home. The Patriots, not scaring anybody right now on offense, defense, or anything in between, right?
Yep.
Packers at home.
Oh, they've given up a ton. Again, that feels like a really nice 4-game run for Caleb Williams.
So Caleb Williams has top 10 fantasy value at quarterback in the 4 games after his bye. I'm going to stop there because the schedule, they have this very quirky schedule, do the Bears, where they don't play a single division game against the best division in football until that Packers game, which isn't until, if my math is correct, week 10. So very, very heavy. But you got a lot of Lions and Vikings and Packers down the stretch with some Seahawks and other teams mixed in there. I don't know if the matchups will allow for Caleb to remain a top 10 quarterback, but what I do know is that based off how he's played over the past few weeks and how he can continue to grow in his confidence, that gives you a real shot to see a sticky value at quarterback, and he's benefited other people as well. Cole Kmet yesterday had 24 points on the day, 5 catches, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Tight end 1 for the day, and I know it's still early enough in the season where sample sizes are relatively small. He's tight end 2 on the year. So in a year in which you've been begging for some sort of tight end stability, I can't promise you Cole Kmet's going to go off every single week, but he has established himself as one of the top 10 fantasy options at tight end. And then perhaps the demise of DeAndre Swift was too quickly introduced, is over the past 3 weeks, get this for DeAndre Swift, amongst all running backs, second in fantasy points, averaging 23.8 per game. He's got 67 touches. Nobody has, that's downright Alvin Kamara-like. He's second in carries. He's third in rushing touchdowns. He's first in receiving yards amongst running backs. He's second in scrimmage yards. When the Bears return from their bye in Week 8, so they have this week off, DeAndre Swift, going to be a top 10 running back. Caleb Williams, going to be a top 10 quarterback for me. Cole Kmet, going to be a top 10 tight end. I know we're all hoping for the wide receivers to go crazy this year. It may not be that one of them dominates to the point that he is a top 10 or 15 wide receiver, but for now, we'll dismiss that to note that Caleb Williams is an absolute beast for fantasy football.
Yeah, the #1 overall pick absolutely has turned into the rising tide that is lifting all the boats there in that Chicago Bears offense.
It's really interesting. I'm not surprised by the evolution of Caleb. I mean, he just seemed like somebody who's eager to learn, adjust quickly in terms of understanding what his relationship is with his receivers, understanding how to play the game at the NFL level. And if you look at who they were facing, I mean, you talked about looking ahead at their schedule, but look at their first 3 weeks. It was Tennessee and Houston. I mean, both tough defenses, and then Indy. And then they had the Rams, Panthers, and then the Jaguars. So the timing of his growth coincided nicely with defenses that they could perform well against. So I think this speaks very well for that continued trajectory upward for all of them.
I'm with you on that.
NFC North loaded. The NFC South, Stephania, like a little more confusing. Like I can't quite get a grip of whether the Saints are actually good or if they're more of the 4 losses in a row. But the Bucs offense rules.
Oh my God.
Bucs offense totally rules. Would you like me to talk about my take?
Please, let's talk about it.
It's right there. I mean, I am huge on Chris Godwin. I was big on him coming into this game. And I think at the start of the season, we sort of wondered what would happen with Chris Godwin because it felt like last year was sort of a lost year for him. But think about this. Right now, going into the Monday night game, he is the top fantasy point earner of the week with the most, third most fantasy points in a game in career, 35.5 fantasy points. 35.5, that's not a mistake. That's how many points you got from Chris Godwin yesterday. He's 6th among all players for 2024.
Wow.
He's the top leading fantasy points earner among wide receivers for 2024. So this is not a fluke. And I think that to me, this was like the cherry on top of what's been a really successful first 6 weeks for him. Here's his fantasy point totals per week. 22.3, 24.7, 17.3, 12.9, 11.6. Even when he had a dip, it was still double-digit fantasy points, and then 35.5 in a week where we knew that Mike Evans might not be able to, this has been traditionally where Mike Evans has struggled is against the Saints. Mike Clay told us all of those stats about that. So you knew Godwin was likely to have a big game, but this also speaks to me to the relationship between him and Baker Mayfield. And by the way, Baker Mayfield's way up there in fantasy points earning is one of the top 5 in 2024 as well. So when your quarterback is thriving in the offense and you've got a receiver who is playing at a comfort level that I haven't seen for, I think it's been a few years, like it was before he had the big injury really, that I think we've seen this level of play from Chris Godwin.
Chris Godwin, one of 3 wide receivers in the NFL with at least 17 fantasy points in 4 games so far this year. And like you said, even with his down weeks are still totally stomachable when you're talking about...
Yeah. Stomachable.
I'm making up words, Stephania. Okay, listen, I'm still like, reeling from the situation.
Yeah.
But he's been awesome. And you mentioned it about Baker Mayfield. Like, are we at the point where Baker Mayfield, I just want to read off what he has been at the quarterback position so far this year. Okay. Week 1, QB2.
Awesome.
Week 2, QB5.
Awesome.
Week 3, quarterback 28.
Happens.
Week 4, quarterback 2.
Yep.
Week 5, quarterback 7. And right now in week 6, heading into Monday Night Football, quarterback 2. He's got 3 top 2 finishes, and 5 of his 6 games, he has been a top 7 quarterback. Has he earned the right to be a set-it-and-forget-it starter now?
I jumped in there to emphasize just how much I believe the answer is.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, they play the Ravens
I was
next
just
Monday
going to
night.
say, is this, I don't know.
I don't run the football against the Ravens. I throw the football against the Ravens.
That's a good point.
They've evolved as a defense. They've obviously, they've undergone some attrition, and they brought in Dean Pease this past week. They are not the same Ravens defense they won wherever the past. But it's just like, so Baker, when you watch him, now I get it. He had 3 interceptions yesterday, and there were some disappointing moments, and still 25.9 fantasy points from Baker. Like, I just think at some point it grows tiresome to keep questioning Baker Mayfield. The guy's playing excellent football. He's got awesome weapons all around him, including a running back who, unless your name is Jackson Agello, you didn't know of until yesterday. We'll talk about him in a moment. Loaded, pass-friendly offense, fantasy-friendly offense. I think Baker Mayfield, especially in that division, where if he can do it against the Saints yesterday, the Falcons don't scare me as much as the Saints should, and the Panthers don't scare me as much as either of those defenses. That's 6 games during the season where you're saying to yourself, I expect a big day from Baker. That's just the in-division games. Baker deserves more respect.
I agree.
I don't disagree, but if you look at his next 4 matchups, Ravens, then Atlanta, then the Chiefs, then the 49ers. So if I'm in a 10-team league, I'm probably just looking and see, because I'm willing to stream matchups with some of these quarterbacks. If you look at Baker, that week that he played Denver, one of the best defenses, right? Until Pat Surtain went out this week with an injury, but he was quarterback 28.
Yep.
And so maybe if I'm looking at, you can throw against the Niners depending on who's playing. Their secondary's been banged up as well, but I'd just be looking around. They're at Kansas City. It's a tough place to play. Chiefs defense is solid. I would just say I'm not getting rid of Baker Mayfield, but I always look at my options.
I'm more optimistic. I think I'm more on the field bandwagon of like top 7.
Welcome.
I thought the same thing coming into the Saints game, where I had him as like quarterback 13 or 14.
Question was set it and forget it.
You're right. That's
He's
fair.
pretty close to it for me, though. Like, obviously that week, and I don't know all the matchups the week that they play Kansas City, if there are, 4 or 5 quarterbacks that are in great spots. Like, whoever's playing Jacksonville, even if you're not a great quarterback, like, you have my attention as an example. That being said, I just, he's excellent, right? Like, I think in real life, if I'm building a franchise, both for this year and for the next 10 years, I unquestionably prefer C.J. Stroud to Baker Mayfield. But in fantasy, if I'm trying to win a championship tomorrow, and I don't know who the opponent is, I want Baker Mayfield right now.
He's looking
as an example of a player who I don't think, we sort of assume C.J. Stroud is pretty close to, like, you're playing him most every week. I think Baker Mayfield deserves to be in at least that conversation.
100%.
Yeah. How about, and you mentioned this, you alluded to this a little bit. Dude, let's just give, like, some love to Sean Tucker. Holy smokes. No Rachaad White in this game. We all thought it was going to be a Bucky Irving game. By the way, Bucky Irving
had a good game.
Yeah.
He had a good game.
He had a good game, too.
We're all excited
I told
about
you
Sean
sight on
Tucker,
scene, hey, you could sign up for 18.5 points from Bucky Irving. You'd
Sounds
say,
like a day.
1,000%.
Yep.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And yet, he was by far the worst running back for the Buccaneers. Sean Tucker, pride of Syracuse University, who last year in the preseason, Jackson Agello, who works on the show, is great, huge, proud Syracuse alum. When the Bucks' backfield was very thin, and we were talking about how, like, hey, there's no competition behind Rachaad White. He should be a pretty busy guy, even if inefficient. Jackson was like, yeah, but Sean Tucker, he's a beast. And we're like, hey, Jackson, yeah, sweet, thanks, sounds good. And yesterday, how about highest scoring running back in fantasy for the week, Sean Tucker?
Unbelievable.
Congratulations to the 3 people that started Sean Tucker in fantasy this weekend. Jackson Agello in 1 league, Jackson Agello in a second league. Jackson Agello in his 3rd league. Like, I just want to say shout out to you, because otherwise it's like, this is the classic, like, the points that help absolutely nobody. I don't know that I'm quite ready to say that, like, this means something. Rachaad White could be back as soon as next week. We don't know. But
Bucky Irving's had a hamstring issue. So is it like, is there a volume thing that they were controlling volume to some degree, so they were going to make sure that they split the work? But, man, is it exciting to see. And how happy are you if you're Tampa Bay, because you know what you have available to you?
Let's try this. Assuming Rachaad White, and I'm not assuming this, I don't know this for a fact. If Rachaad White returns next week, will Sean Tucker score more than 34.2 fantasy points for the rest of the season?
Oh, the rest of the season.
Rest of the season. We got 12 games left for Tampa Bay. Sean Tucker, who had scored fantasy points in 6 games, who has now scored fantasy points, at least .0001 fantasy points in 6 games. 3 of those games, it's been under 1 fantasy point.
I was going to say, what were the totals in those other 6 games?
Rest of the season, so if Rachaad White is going to miss 2 to 3 weeks, then it's a kind of a, like, I'm almost like I'm voiding the bet, so to speak.
Yeah.
But Rachaad White's back.
I don't think so. I think
crazy.
Yeah, like I mean, the idea of he is in this third running back role. They really like Bucky Irving. As long as both of those two running backs are healthy ahead of him, I don't see this happening, which is why we just want to give love to the kid today because of everything that he did. Unbelievable. He's rostered in 1% of leagues. He was started by Jackson Agello in 0.7% of leagues. I can't imagine what kind of leagues someone was starting and throwing a dart at Sean Tucker, but if you did, congratulations because you had yourself
Probably made some best ball leagues or something. I think
Something like
probably
that.
had got
Not even sure.
somebody.
I was thinking, Syracuse has very proud alumni base, right?
Oh,
Half of them work at ESPN.
My grandmother went to Syracuse.
Oh, how about that? I didn't know that. Grandma Bell. Or I don't know which side of the family.
Yeah.
Stephania's grandma, but it's a very proud alumni base. Like they play in the basketball tournament, the TBT. It's called the basketball tournament, and it's like the Orange Army. I bet there's at least a handful of leagues that like you can only play Syracuse players.
Yep.
In your fantasy.
You know who probably knew who Sean Tucker was? Is
Matthew
my
Berry.
mom.
Oh, okay.
Because she watches all the Syracuse football games.
Good for your mom.
Yeah, routinely. And then she calls me to tell me how she thinks they got jobbed by some ref calls or something.
She might have been one of the
avid Syracuse
0.7% that started in fantasy this
She
week.
might have been. I'm going to ask her if she knew who Sean Tucker
Can I ask you, Daniel?
Yeah.
Now that we've established that Sean Tucker's the best running back in the
NFC South?
who's
Yeah.
the second best in your
This is a good lead in, Field Yates. I want to give some love to Bijan Robinson because fantasy managers were panicking a little bit coming into this week. He had not finished higher than running back 15 through the first 5 weeks of the season, and you drafted him as one of the top 2 or 3 running backs in fantasy football. 18 touches, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns, 25.5 fantasy points, third most fantasy points of his career, and he's involved in every facet of the game. He gets an early down role. He gets passing game work. He gets goal line work. I know, and I just want to say this, I know that Tyler Algier also had himself a nice day. This was the Carolina Panthers. What you do against Carolina is you run the ball until your running back's legs are about to fall off, and then you give the ball to your backup running back, and you continue to run the football. So I'm not worried about the idea that Tyler Algier came in and had himself a nice day. By the way, of the 19.8 fantasy points that Tyler Algier had, 15 of them came in the second half. This was one of those situations where it's like, all right, we're just going to keep doing what's working for this team. They did not want to, I don't think that the Falcons wanted to give the ball to Bijan Robinson 35 times, but they did want to continue to run the ball over and over and over because that's one of the biggest weaknesses of the Panthers defense. So this is why you don't panic and sell early on players that you have higher expectations for. We told you to hold tight, not move on. This is the reason why.
I also will say this. Stephania mentioned earlier about how Caleb Williams got the job done against the Rams, Jaguars, and Panthers. Rams, Panthers, Jaguars in that order.
Yep.
And some people might look at that as like, oh, Caleb Williams is just, taking advantage of a bad matchup. In fantasy, I don't care whether it's a bad matchup and you take advantage of it. I want you to smash and smash spots.
Exactly.
So it's good when you fulfill expectations because, well, Bijan was great and Drake London found the end zone yesterday and Algier did as well. Kirk Cousins did not smash yesterday.
No, he did not.
Right? So, you can say, well, yeah, you're playing against the Panthers or the Jaguars. Okay, you got the job done. That's what matters to me. So, a monster day for Bijan and hopefully a sign of the 4-2 now are the Falcons.
That's right.
Trending
Trending
upwards. Yep.
I always thought that was a weird argument where it's like, oh, yeah, but they did it against a bad defense. It's like, that's what they're supposed to do against bad defense.
Would you prefer the alternative?
Yeah, like, what do you...
You know what? You played the Panthers, but you only got me 8 fantasy points. No.
It's almost like people are rooting for the negative in that scenario rather than being like, all right, this is what we expected to happen.
I would agree.
All right, let's talk about some studs that happened in Week 6. Guys that absolutely crushed. Derrick Henry. I just want to give some love to my guy, Derrick Henry. Oh, my gosh.
Your guy.
Our guy.
Okay.
Our guy.
Better.
I did a hot chip segment where I said he was going to score
Daniel
20
put
touchdowns.
his life on the line for Daniel.
For what it's worth.
Derrick
So
Henry.
I just want it to
collectively,
be known that there were some.
that we were both there.
Yes, we were
2 touchdowns last week, 24 carries for 132 yards, running back 4 so far on the week. He's got 9 touchdowns this season. Through 6 games, 9 touchdowns.
He's 3rd overall in fantasy points this season. 3rd overall in fantasy points.
How many
for the
receiving
year.
yards he has this season? 48. He didn't catch the ball hardly.
He's
Doesn't
doing
have
it
to.
all with
That
touchdowns.
might be wrong. He just scores. He just scores
Doesn't
all
have
the
to.
time.
He is the old school running back in the sense of I'm going to pound the ball.
Yep.
I'm going to run right through you.
Yep.
I'm going to run over you.
Yep.
I don't care what defense you throw at me. This makes me so happy because I felt like he was going to thrive in the Ravens offense. This is like, to me, the perfect setup between him and Lamar. I mean, there is a reason this is working here. Because if you're a defense, you're like, well, if we got to account for this guy, we need half the defense to try and stop him. If we got to account for this guy, we need our fastest linebackers on him.
It's harmony.
And then
Beautiful.
Lamar's been playing well in the passing game. So
Everyone.
it's like every defense is mystified with how to cover it. And at the end, don't you think they're just tired? And that's when they throw Derrick Henry out there and like, just go run some more.
He's that guy that gets stronger towards the end of games. I don't know how it works. 25 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. I don't know what else you say other than if you have Derrick Henry, congratulations, because you are thrilled right now. How about also, though, if you got Zay Flowers, just speaking of the Ravens, this kid crushed it, and he's been pretty good these last couple of weeks, Field Yates. Lamar only threw 7 passes the entire second half, which meant that the 9 catches for 132 yards all happened in the first half for Zay Flowers.
Yeah, we talk about how, like, in some ways, Zay Flowers is swimming upstream in this sense that, like, he plays in a very low-volume passing offense because you have the best rushing quarterback of all time. Lamar is now second, by the way. Congrats to him for passing Cam Newton yesterday in quarterback rushing yards for his career.
Amazing.
Lamar is, like, nowhere close to done and needs, like, 400 more yards to pass Michael Vick for the most ever. And you have the best running back in terms of pure rushing over at least the past half decade in Derrick Henry. They're going to run the football like crazy. And yet, if you think, and I know that it feels a little bit uneven because of how the first, like, quarter of the season went for Zay Flowers. He's got 3 100-yard games in his past 7 outings.
Yes, he does.
Not bad. 21 targets over the past 2 games. So you're taking solace in this fact, is that, again, he's more vulnerable than most number 1 wide receivers to low volume because they don't need him to.
Yep.
But no other wide receiver matters in this offense. None. And if Lamar's going to throw the football 25 times, there's a deep, which is not a big number, obviously, but if he throws the ball 25 times, Zay Flowers could still easily get to 7 or 8 targets. And that's good enough for a guy with his talent because, I'll tell you what, he is like microwavable offense out there.
Oh, yeah.
You throw him the football, and I don't know if you want to describe it as a joystick, a jitterbug, like a frog in traffic. Like, this guy is awesome out there with the football in his hands.
He's fantastic.
He is really fun.
He's very fun to watch. Does have a little bit, like you mentioned, that boom-bust nature to him, just given the state of the offense that he is in. But in these games where they utilize him the way that you hope that you do, 19 or more fantasy points in back-to-back games. You mentioned how many 100-yard games he's had this year. He's been fantastic. Stephania, one more guy in this Ravens offense.
Yeah, guess who found the end zone yesterday? Guess who arrived yesterday in the end zone? And by the way, I don't care what you say, John Harbaugh, don't you tell me that Mark Andrews was not excited about that touchdown.
Oh, he was pumped.
The celebration was like, he was so fired up. I felt like there was a release of all the tension, of all the people asking all the time about when is Mark Andrews going to catch passes. Best fantasy day that he has had so far. 15.6 fantasy points, and he gets a touchdown. It's still not what we want, though. Let's be honest. It's
not because of the production,
right,
but because of like how much time he's on the field and running routes and seeing targets.
Yes. And I think, Isaiah Likely was out there, only 4.7 fantasy points for him. I mean, it continues to be a bit of a puzzle as to what exactly the role is for the tight ends and who's going to be the preferred. But Mark Andrews has trended upwards if you want to take 2 weeks into account.
This is where I want to be excited for the human Mark Andrews because it felt like, man, what has happened to him in this offense? But when I look at the fantasy production, yes, way more fantasy points this week, and we love that. But when you look at the snap share, Isaiah Likely still played 44 snaps. Mark Andrews only played 33. It feels like Isaiah Likely is the tight end that is out there more often than not than Mark Andrews. That's the main takeaway.
So from a silver linings playbook perspective here,
great movie.
I can't tell you how many notifications I got where it was like, insert team X dropped Mark Andrews. And maybe, it's like you're almost like, dang, dude, like we've come that far. And I get it. I get it based off how the first 4 games went. The fact that we put together back-to-back games, like, I'd go check now if he's available in your league.
He is.
What's the percentage?
I take that back. No, I was looking at the starting percentage. Sorry. Okay. He's still rostered in 77% of leagues.
Okay, so, but still, I mean, a quarter of leagues, basically, he is available, so go check.
Yep.
Right? I'd add him now. Like, I'd re-add Mark, like, timeout's over. And let's hope that we can stack, 4 games as opposed to just 2 in a row. So, not quite there yet that we're telling you, hey, this is a top 12 tight end option, but trending up enough in a barren landscape at tight end that at least go check. Just at least go check.
Let's talk about Joe Mixon. Because I think Joe Mixon was also awesome this week. He has played 2 fully healthy games this year. Week 1, 26.8 fantasy points, and this last week, 27.2 fantasy points. He got banged up in week 3 with an ankle injury. He did leave and then came back into that game and tried to tough it out, but he still left early in that one. But Stephania, just in looking at what he has looked like, coming back from the injury that he's been dealing with, how did you feel like Joe Mixon looked this week?
Better than I maybe expected. You know, we weren't sure. He hadn't been on the practice field much. I mean, really, he'd been a non-participant in practice until a couple limited workouts this past week. And we talked about this on the show yesterday. I must have mentioned it several times about how angry he was about being the leading rusher in the league after 1 week of football, and then had it ended when he got hurt, and very frustrated with that. So I think a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he wanted to get back and prove that he belonged in that conversation. He's working well in this offense. I feel like he's gotten a fresh start in Houston. And I don't know, you know, it's a small sample size, right? This is 2 full games with this kind of production. So you want to see if it continues. But certainly you have to be excited about that.
Totally changes the offense for Houston when he's in there. They got enough production, but not great production when he was gone. Bengals fans out there that are listening to the podcast, or people that have just followed Joe Mixon closely, did he get better? He looks better, way better as a football player in Houston than he did in Cincinnati. Maybe it's the offensive line. Maybe it's trying to prove something. I don't know what it is. But he looks better to me than he did when he was in Cincinnati last season and for the past several seasons. I know he had some great fantasy days. The 50-plus point outing last year, always a threat for 10-plus touchdowns in a season. But Joe Mixon looks better to me by the eyeball test. He had a 50-plus yard run yesterday. Looks great. Even better volume, I think, will continue to keep him in that top 7 to 8 running back mix. Similar vein in the sense that a guy crushed it in week 1 and then has been out for 3 games plus a bye week. Is there a wide receiver, and this is like just first blush answer, yes or no, that you would prefer rest of season to A.J. Brown? Go, yes or no?
No.
Okay, Stephania, yes or no?
I'm having a hard time coming up with one. I was going to say.
There's some good
I want to say, yeah, but.
Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, et cetera.
Yeah.
But how about this? A.J. Brown in 2 games this season. I get it. He missed some time. But rest of season, we're talking about from week 7 on. A.J. Brown in 2 games this year. At least 9 targets. 9 in one, 10 in the other. At least 100 receiving yards in both games. A touchdown in both games. A 40-plus yard catch in both games. A.J. Brown completely dominates when he is on the field. Go back to last season. He had that 6-game stretch where he went with at least 125 receiving yards. I know that the vast majority in our leadership often reminds us that something like 90% of the leagues on ESPN.com are either 8-team or PPR scoring or both. So the vast majority of our audience is focused on PPR scoring. I think he's the best non-PPR wide receiver, though. I don't think that part's close because while he has gotten good volume, the big play threat from A.J. Brown, I think, is unmatched amongst wide receivers right now with Tua unavailable for the Dolphins at least for a little bit longer. He is just an absolute beast out there on the field. Welcome back. The Eagles' offense is still a major work in progress, but damn it, I missed you, A.J. Brown. I am so happy to see you back. Welcome back to the lineup. The bye is already behind you. You got 12 more weeks of utility.
He's wearing green.
I'm wearing my Kelly Green shoes.
I love it.
A.J. Brown.
Here's the thing. Maybe it's because I don't trust the Eagles' offense because it's just so – it's been difficult to watch what's happening with the Eagles. And so with A.J. Brown only being a part of it on these 2 games, you know, at the beginning and then now coming back last week, I just don't know if I have the trust. I have the trust in him. Obviously, Jalen Hurts trusts him. He's got the top get open score, that relatively new metric that looks at how receivers are able to get open. It's different from separation.
Is that because he's always open?
To it. Well, are you starting trouble?
No, I'm just saying, like, this is one of those things where it's like when you're as big and fast as A.J. Brown, even when you're covered, like, you're still kind of always
interesting
open.
Because he's not the fastest guy. It really has to do with, like, number one, he's an awesome route runner, but it's the way he's able to manipulate who's covering him and able to get open and then be physical at the point of contact. So in that regard, that to me is why he's one of my favorite players. But I don't totally trust the Eagles' offense. I hope he can keep doing this.
Dude.
But listen, I don't feel great about that.
Well, I got 2 quick stats for you. 11 of his last 17 games, he's had at least 100 yards or a touchdown. So that consistency that we're talking about is absolutely unbelievable. Since 2022, he is 3rd in the NFL with 1,600-yard games, only behind Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson.
It's damn good company.
And I'll tell you what,
really good company.
we got a little bit of breaking news here from Adam Schefter. I don't know if anyone else saw this.
It's about Tua?
Yep.
Yeah, so sort of a kind of update, kind of an update, kind of a non-update.
Go ahead.
So Mike McDaniel basically said that he said Tua's not going to play this week, which thank you, because he wasn't eligible to play this week.
Yeah.
So, duh. But he expects to play at some point during the season.
Okay. I mean, at least if you expect him to play at some point during the season, that's going to hopefully bring some of that value back to either any one of these.
I don't think Mike
offensive
McDaniel was trying to be I don't think he was trying to throw a curveball to the media. I think he's just stating right now what he is comfortable saying, which is that
Not this week.
Play at some point this season, but he
will be back.
Is ineligible to play this week because he's only missed 3 games on IR. So he's got at least one more game. He's going to be out. Snoop Huntley should take the reins once again this week.
All right, let's talk about another guy returning from injury that had a huge game, Evan Engram. Holy smokes.
Tell me more.
Dude, if you needed a tight end, we have been waiting for Evan Engram to come back. I cannot tell you how long I have been streaming backup tight ends. Hopefully it was Cole Kmet, for what it's worth, for those of you that had Evan Engram. But he looked absolutely fantastic. 10 targets, 10 receptions, 102 receiving yards. He did have a fumble, which is a bummer, but 18.2 fantasy points. Stephania, did you see anything in his return while dealing with that hamstring that made you nervous moving forward, or does this feel like, hey, we've unlocked Evan Engram, good to go moving forward?
No, and this really applies to both A.J. Brown and Evan Engram because they were both coming back from hamstring injuries that cost them multiple weeks. And in both cases, we talked about the fact that the teams were being maybe a little conservative because it was early in the year and extending their absence beyond what we had initially thought or hoped in an effort to make sure that when they did come back, there would not be a setback. And both players put up the kind of performance that when they got through it, and as here we sit on Monday morning, there have been no reports of a setback. Now,
love that.
Things do trickle out Monday and Tuesday, so let's just make sure that we don't see anything come to light in the next 24 hours. But both of them looked the part. They executed. They delivered from a fantasy perspective. They delivered from a real football perspective. And to me, that's just a reminder to everyone that, hey, these injuries can take a little longer than you expect. You like the hamstring, 1 or 2 games. But there's a high recidivism with hamstring injuries. That is the biggest problem. Everybody worries about a recurrence, and then that's going to knock the player out for even longer. If that was what we missed from A.J. Brown and Evan Engram, and we get what we saw yesterday from both of them the rest of the season, then wasn't it worth it?
100%.
Except for when I had to start, who knows, some random
Cole
tight
Fotheringham,
end.
in the tight end spot.
Blake Whitehead was my guy.
That's what
White hair or Whitehead? Whitehead, one of the two.
I want to ask you this question, Field. If now that we've got Evan Engram back, and I want to be polite when I say this, but it feels like the Jaguars' defense stinks.
That's the nicest thing anybody has ever said about
Just trying to say it in a nice way.
Awful.
If they're this bad for the entirety of the rest of the season, I know that we had some of these other skill position players not really perform for the Jaguars, but I am thrilled, and it feels like, I mean, you keep talking about this. Is this a steady, incline for this Jaguars offense because they're going to be playing a lot of garbage time, just throwing late?
Okay, yes, but just bottle this take up and maybe save it for next week because they play the Patriots on Sunday, and it might be. Okay. We'll have more news on the Jaguars, by the way, because sounds like Travis Etienne. We'll talk about Travis Etienne in a bit. So, I don't. It's a good point by you. I just don't know that it matters as much in Week 7 as it will in
moving forward
other games. They might be favored for maybe the last time of the season on Sunday.
All right.
Also, I mean, they're playing in their home turf.
Yeah, baby.
Also,
Wembley.
London, in Wembley Stadium. So
Wembley.
if you can say one thing for them, it's at least they don't have to get on a plane and travel. I saw a couple notes that's going to be a long flight home. I'm like, no, it's going to be a lonely hotel.
Yeah.
Hotel night. They weren't traveling. I mean, at least not far.
Have you ever heard of Wally Pipp, Daniel?
I have heard of Wally Pipp.
Wonder if he might be taking a little visit in memoriam down to East Rutherford, New Jersey sometime.
Feels like it.
Yeah,
Because our guy Devin Singletary
particular
missed
running
another
back?
game
Yeah.
last night with that groin injury. We'll see whether he's back this upcoming week. But I tell you what, it's going to be awfully hard for the Giants to keep Tyrone Tracy off the field. He ran okay last night. He averaged under 3 yards per carry. Wasn't great in that regard, 17 for 50. He did find the end zone, though, and he had 6 catches for 57 yards. Yeah. He looks good, man. He looks good. I mean, the Giants were undone. I mean, they weren't great offensively last night. And can we make a damn kick?
Please.
That was.
It just blows my mind when
That
it's like
was
I'm watching
so
like
bad.
freaking Brandon Aubrey and Kaimi Fairbarn or other guys draw like 59 yarders, 62 yarders, 64 yarders, and then it's like we can't make a 43-yard field goal. What? Really? Seriously? Any event, yeah, he was awesome last night. Tyrone Tracy. We have a big waiver show coming tomorrow. This is a rare one where it feels like a third of the way through the season, talking about a player that like is still available in 50+% of leagues, who could, I'm not guaranteeing it, but could become a weekly starter. I think the reality is that when Devin Singletary is back, he plays a whole lot more than Eric Gray did last night. Like, it's not going to be the Tyrone Tracy show all to itself. Singletary is a fine football player, but I think the days, remember at the beginning of the season, it was Devin Singletary playing like 70% of snaps. Those days, behind us. Bye-bye.
Yeah, Tyrone Tracy, like you said, I don't know how they keep him off the field with everything that he has done.
RB5 again after a monster week last week.
Unbelievable. And you know what I love? I love that he did it in 2 different ways each of those weeks, because the first week that he did this, it was very efficient in rushing. This week it was not only getting in the end zone, but all that passing game work. So you like to be able to see that.
Spark. I mean, it's clearly a difference maker on the field, just the energy that he
This
brought.
offense, especially when Malik Neighbors isn't there, they need guys.
Oh.
They do.
Like, they need anyone to be able to help this offense get going, and Tyrone Tracy clearly was that guy last night.
Sure.
All right, let's talk about some special shout-outs. Not as much as these guys, but we're going to get some shout-outs. A few guys that were not too bad. David Montgomery, I'll tell you what, unless your name was Scott Porter, maybe you weren't totally in on David Montgomery, but I was thrilled with what he has done so far this year. And again, 2 touchdowns. He's had a touchdown in every single game, leads all running backs in fantasy points per snap when he's on the field, 3rd in the NFL with 8 rush attempts inside the 5-yard line. And get this, at least 15 fantasy points in every single game this season. Has not finished outside the top 20 at the running back spot so far this year. Just a shout out to David Montgomery. If you grabbed him as a running back too, he has been outproducing his draft day value.
He's a rich man as well after that new contract. How about Justin Fields out there for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Some murmurs that maybe Russell Wilson's going to be the starter as soon as this weekend.
He's ready.
I tell you
He's
what,
ready.
that would be hard. That would be a hard trigger for me to pull if I am Mike Tomlin, because Justin Fields yesterday, in a very Justin Fields manner, has 2 rushing touchdowns, 11 carries, 59 yards. We talk about Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels being at the top of the heap of those running quarterbacks, less so from Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts this year. Maybe Justin Fields is kind of on the podium there as that 3rd quarterback as far as rushing upside is concerned. Fields now has 18 or more fantasy points in 3 of his past 4 games for as long as he is the starting quarterback. And I really believe, as much as it defies my own personal logic, we are week to week now in terms of who is the starting quarterback in Pittsburgh. Justin Fields right there on that top 12-ish radar for your quarterbacks, because damn, is he a good runner.
Well, you know, it takes pressure off of a running quarterback is somebody who can run the ball as a running back. And that's my shout out is to Najee Harris, who 14 carries, and that's not even the highest number of carries that he's had this year. Sunday, his numbers were mostly on the ground, so not through the air. 106 yards rushing. It's his first 100-yard game of the season, his most fantasy points of the season. Najee Harris, shout out, left for dead, I think, when I think people thought with the return of Jalen Warren, you might not see that kind of production from Najee.
Yeah, and he got in the end zone, which was fantastic for Najee. First rushing touchdown from a Steelers running back this year.
Heyo.
I'm going to give another shout out to the NFC North. Stephania, you mentioned at the top of the show, they are so good. Jordan Love has been absolutely unbelievable since returning from his injury. 28-plus fantasy points in 2 of his 3 games. 16 fantasy points was his lowest outing of the season. It showcases a really nice floor. He is 2nd in passing touchdowns, 2nd in passing yards per game. He is quarterback 4 on the season right now in fantasy points per game, and he's getting everybody involved. He's not just locked into one guy. He's getting a little bit of everyone. Sometimes I wish he would just lock into Jaden Reed, my guy, a little bit more. But still, the idea that he can spread the ball around all the different weapons that he has in this offense. Shout out to Jordan Love for what he's looked like.
Everybody's been banged up, but that hasn't seemed to bother him. He
No, it has
finds
not.
the guys who are on the field.
Yep. Field, you got another one?
Terry McLaurin, baby. Terry McScorin these days. Over the past 4 weeks, Terry McLaurin is wide receiver 4. He's averaging 18.9 fantasy points per game during those 4 weeks. He had 6 catches, 53 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I got to be honest with you guys, too. He's become one of those players where we watch the games down what we call the war room here at ESPN. It's a room right off the cafeteria. It's got about 50 TVs. I think it's more like 20, but still, you have every game on. And I swear, every time my eye catches a Commanders game, Terry McLaurin is catching a pass. We talked out for the first 2 weeks of the season how Cliff Kingsbury needed to stop being stubborn and figure out ways to get Terry McLaurin more involved. He's done that. The results have been great. Terry McLaurin not only is clearly the number one wide receiver on his own team. Remember, they've had some legitimate players playing opposite or around him in the past, but also is playing with the best quarterback by far of his young career.
Oh, so happy.
It's a great marriage between him and Jaden Daniels. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 3 on the week with 23.3 fantasy points. Stephania.
I don't think I ever saw
good.
Terry McLaurin smile until this year.
Yes,
I mean,
seriously.
it's really unbelievable.
Yeah.
That offense is flying. You know what offense is not flying is the Las Vegas Raiders. But there is one bright spot, and that's Brock Bowers, the tight end. We worried about what his opportunity would be like when they drafted him. It didn't seem like the best landing spot, but turns out he's still been fantasy productive. 16.1 fantasy points this week, 9 catches for 71 yards. That's not even his highest point total of the season. He actually had 23.7 fantasy points last week, but it does match most receptions of the year with him having 9. So let's see if this is able to continue, but Brock Bowers, a bright spot this week.
First rookie tight end with back-to-back games of 8 or more catches since Jordan Reed in 2013. There's a throwback for you. Not our ESPN colleague and excellent draft analyst.
He is a great draft analyst.
Former
yes.
Commander Jordan Reed.
Yeah, I do want to give
From Connecticut as well.
one quick. Was he really?
Yeah, I think New London.
I did not know that. One last shout out from me, and I'll be very fast about this, but obviously we talked about it off the top. But a shout out to Aiden Hutchinson, who was, I do believe, a Defensive Player of the Year candidate coming into this, led the NFL in sacks in spite of the fact that the Lions had already had their bye and he had played one less game than a lot of people.
The shortest odds to win DPOI at ESPN Bet prior to yesterday.
Yep. So that was just really a huge bummer. But what can you do? Anyway, speaking of bad, let's talk about some duds this week. You know what? I think there's a Saquon Barkley rule, and the rule is that he's always good, and this week was an exception to that because normally Saquon is absolutely amazing. This week, though, 18 carries for 47 yards, fewest yards of the season, only 7.4 fantasy points, fewest fantasy points of the season. He's currently running back 31 on the week.
I'm not sure. I don't think you play golf. Do you, Daniel?
No, I play video game golf because I can't play real golf yet.
Do you ever have a day where anybody who's out there who's listening who plays a lot of golf, you feel like you swing the club pretty well, but you just can't make a putt, can't find the fairway, whatever it is, like. Every once in a while, but
That's
you're
me
coming back
every
tomorrow.
time.
There you go. Yeah, all right, but you're still going to get up the next day. You're going to continue to play. You still love it.
That's right.
Still have hope.
Saquon Barkley this week. What are you going to do? If I told you just blindly, like Saquon Barkley gets 20 opportunities, you starting him or you sitting him? How many times out of 100 you say?
100 times out of 100 you're starting him.
So bad day at the office. It happens to all of us. RB31 on the week. Saquon will be just fine. That Browns defense played with a bit more pride than they have throughout much of this season.
It really did.
Saquon's totally fine. It stinks, but we just want you to know that, we're in this one together. He's back next week.
Better days ahead.
Yep.
Yeah. Speaking of better days ahead, I got to believe better days are ahead for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not sure, but I got to believe it.
The thing is that when they're bad, it's complete collapse, dysfunction. I don't know what I'm watching, but it's really hard to explain. And Dak Prescott, who I have rostered on numerous fantasy leagues, so I really don't understand when
You're in the trenches together.
3.22 fantasy points in my column. I don't understand this. Aren't they supposed to have this talented wide receiver core? We were just praising Jalen Tolbert last week. CeeDee Lamb was the first wide receiver drafted overall in many fantasy leagues.
And it's so crazy because everything you're describing, the game plan played into the narrative of, okay, let's say the Lions get up and they score a lot of points. Well, you can't run against them, so they're going to have to throw a ton.
Against them.
Exactly.
I thought he would have a huge day.
So I'm going to do, I'm going to give both audiences what they want. If you want me to come up here and tell you that Dak has been awful and that you regret taking him and you wish you had taken somebody like Jaden Daniels or Brock Purdy or Joe Burrow, who are all going in that same range, you are correct because Dak has been terrible for the most part this season. And CeeDee Lamb, we've talked about the consternation. We've had our ugh, I want more from Bijan. Ugh, I want more from Breece Hall. Ugh, CMC still hurt. None of the first 5 guys who we were telling you, these are the 5 that stand above the rest, have exactly been, head and shoulders above everybody else. Tyreek Hill, large part because of his quarterback situation. CeeDee's been fine. He hasn't been great. He was fine yesterday as well, but this Cowboys offense is dreadful. Now, if you're part of the audience that's like, dude, man, like, I'm already down. I probably lost because of Dak. Can you at least infuse me with some hope? Here's what I got for you. They go on a bye this week.
Yep.
You don't have to worry about it. You start somebody else. You can't blame yourself for starting Dak in week 7. On top of that, as we noted coming into the season, remember CeeDee Lamb's numbers soared after the Cowboys had their bye week. Their last 11 games, he went nuts. They have their bye week in week 7. They have 11 games after this. So there is a reminder as recently as last year that Dak and CeeDee can get hotter than the sun and carry your team to a bunch of wins.
You know what's interesting? Apparently, Mike McCarthy has a really good record coming out of rest as well. And so,
is he the coach after tomorrow? Like, I mean, Jerry
well,
says yes.
I mean,
would you be stunned by anything?
who is to know? But if that were a contributing factor, maybe they all just need to go away, kumbaya, come back after a little rest, regroup, and we're going to see the Dallas Cowboys that were meant to be. I believe Dak Prescott is a better quarterback than this. So
I want to say this.
I'm in your second group.
Okay.
He's better than 3.2 fantasy points, but the question is, can they put this together? I saw a very funny tweet. You talked about them being hotter than the sun. Just a shout out to Danny Heifetz. I don't know if you saw this yesterday on Twitter.
No.
But
Danny's great. We love Danny.
Yeah, he tweeted this actually in 2022 and then retweeted it last night. We're going to build the stadium east to west so the sun completely blinds the players on the field. Also, we're going to make the scoreboard low enough for your punter to hit. Oh, that's great. How much will it cost? $1 billion. And it's just like, it's so crazy when you look at the feed and you see the way that players have either got to stare directly into the sun or look back into the sun to catch the football in these 4 p.m. games.
You
I don't know how
really
they do
appreciate it until you have a photo where you see
You
what that
really
clear
see
is.
it.
Like
They
it's
have a
easy
roof,
to be.
a retractable roof. Am I making that up?
If they have a retractable roof, they should have closed it. Because it certainly didn't help
was
them
bad
yesterday.
yesterday.
Yeah,
Weird.
that was one of those weird ones. But hopefully better days are ahead. Field. I appreciate you taking both stances so that you can hit anybody in either party with where they're at. What about Kyler Murray, though? Do you have both stances on Kyler Murray?
Here's what I want to ask you guys. Is Kyler Murray still a weekly start? Like if you have Kyler right now, if you have Kyler right at this moment, are you, without thinking about it, starting him week 7? Let's just go through the numbers. Let's
You
do
already
the
know
numerical
that
case,
I am
right?
you already know that I am not a set it and forget it my quarterback, and with the exception of maybe.
So you're kind of always thinking about it as it were, unless you have a
Correct.
Lamar or Jaden Daniels,
Correct.
probably
Right.
that type of quarterback, right? Let's just look at the numbers for Kyler. Let's just give them to you through 6 weeks. 14.18 fantasy points, quarterback 15.
Not great.
28.54, quarterback 1. That's great, right?
Love that.
14.78, quarterback 17. 9.98, quarterback 23. 24.1, quarterback 5. 11.96, quarterback 21. So 4 finishes as quarterback 15 or worse for Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
So
That's not
the
gonna
numbers,
cut it.
and now the upside is spectacular, right? 2 top 5 finishes, including a number 1 quarterback finish. That's great.
That's the hard part, right? Because he's got the skill set to be a QB1 on any given week, but there's no consistency in his game.
And the other thing about Kyler, to take this one step further, is that we were talking earlier, again, to make this point yet again. Yes, Caleb Williams has been smashing good spots. Kyler's been in good spots and let us down, right? So it feels like Kyler can defy you for better or worse, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't really know what to make of him this week. He's got a good matchup and he stinks. Then it's like, yeah, I'm not sure the matchup's in his favor, and he goes off. He's a confusing player to watch. He's a confusing player so far for fantasy purposes. It didn't help that he lost his top receiver early in the game. Marvin Harrison Jr. went out very, very early. He suffered a concussion. Even still, 11.96 fantasy points?
Yeah.
I think that we've entered the point now where if you have Kyler, and I've noticed this trend, I've talked about this on the show, is that like I've noticed more and more that I'm seeing 2 quarterbacks become the norm on rosters. 10-team leagues to 16 teams. I am seeing a lot of people carrying 2 quarterbacks. If you have Kyler and somebody else, and there have been a few options this year, whether it's Sam Darnold, who's really risen this year, maybe Baker, maybe Geno Smith, guys who weren't heavily drafted, maybe Jared Goff. If you have one of those type of players on your roster along with Kyler, it's going to be a conversation this week. Who do they play? Any idea?
They play the Chargers this week. Then they are at Miami. Then they play the Bears and then the Jets before they go on a bye.
3 of the next 4, with the exception being Miami, I'm thinking I am not trying to play Kyler. Who leads the NFL in scoring defense right now?
Oof.
Chargers.
Really?
Yeah. Number one scoring defense in the NFL is Los Angeles Chargers right now.
That does not.
That sounds like you made that up.
Right?
That sounds like you made that up.
It
Crazy?
doesn't feel believable.
We got a fact check on that.
But here's the
Kyle
other.
Sothi when you
Here's
need
what.
him.
Because I just wanted to look this up because I feel like when I watch the game, I feel like I watched Kyler Murray struggling with whether to run or not run, and I think he plays his best football when he runs freely. And if you look at yesterday, 7 carries, 14 yards. That's not good.
Stephania can confirm this. Look at this. Look at my phone right here.
The font's too tiny.
Look at real close then.
Blow it up for the Reader's Digest version for the adults.
Who's number one?
Oh,
sorry.
NHL?
Chargers, 13.2 points per game allowed.
Trying to make
Number
it work.
one ahead of the Steelers.
That's amazing.
Amazing. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, so
I do, Stephania, I'll say this.
Wait, so let me just finish my point about the rushing. So 7 carries for 14 yards yesterday.
Yep.
When he finished, what was it? He was quarterback 1 in week 2. Okay, fine. 5 for 59. And last week when he was quarterback 5, 7 carries for 83 yards.
Yep.
And a rushing touchdown.
And a touchdown.
So look, in the week before that, when he was quarterback 23, 1 carry for 3 yards. I really think that part of the attraction for fantasy managers in Kyler Murray is you're expecting to get points with the legs. I feel like he plays better football when he is running freely in addition to trying to find the passing outlets.
4 of his 6 games, he's had at least 45 yards rushing. So you like that. I mean, getting almost 5 points a game just from your legs at the quarterback spot you really like. But he has only had 1 game with more than 1 passing touchdown. And he has not topped 266 passing yards. He's been well south of that in the majority of those games. So even though he's getting some good rushing volume, the rest of that game has just fallen flat. And you would have thought with Marvin Harrison Jr., the number 4 overall pick, and I know you said it, he left this game very early with a concussion. We'll continue to monitor that throughout the week. But you still have some good pieces in that offense. You still have Trey McBride, who has done
had a
stuff.
good day yesterday.
9 catches for Trey McBride.
So
I mean, he
it is
became the
vexing.
top receiving target, but I don't think their offense is that interesting beyond Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., and then Kyler.
Kyler is definitely not a de facto top 10 quarterback. I'm kind of looking at matchups and where I want
Those
to
next 4 weeks scare me.
Yep.
Bears, legit on defense. The Jets, as we know, fantastic on defense. And this Chargers team, again, the number 1 scoring defense in the NFL.
We mentioned this a little bit, Stephania. You had alluded to it. But when Chris Godwin has himself a day against the New Orleans Saints, history tells us that Mike Evans does not have himself a day. I feel like Mike Clay told us this over and over and over, the Marshawn Lattimore shadow.
This just played out the way
exactly like we
expected it
thought.
to. Yeah, that's not even really worth debriefing on because we knew it was going to happen.
Marshawn Lattimore clamping Mike.
Yeah, it's just such a funny relationship there.
Is it, should we start doing the thing where when he does play Marshawn Lattimore, we just pull him straight from the rankings?
Right.
Yeah.
Just move him to like wide receiver 48.
Yeah. Like it just feels like I want to think.
Set it and forget it opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. Bench it and forget it is what he is.
The numbers tell you it's a reasonable thing to do.
Really bizarre.
Yeah,
but look, they go back against Baltimore next week, then Atlanta.
Matchup.
Yep.
Okay with that
then the Chiefs, and then San Francisco.
It's an interesting one. So yeah, it's that one again. This falls into a similar category to Saquon Barkley to me. Like
Agreed.
Sucks, but there were a lot of disappointing guys last night. This is what happens in fantasy football. I'm good with it.
This one we at least sort of projected that was going to be a tough day for him.
And
It's
like,
not like it came out of nowhere.
Does your bottom line change on this player? That's kind of how I look at it with these players.
Good
Like,
call.
does your bottom line change? Like, have you moved this player from like you're starting him to you're no longer starting him? Have you moved this player from like you're starting him to I'm benching him to I'm cutting him? In the case of Kyler, I think it might be a start to a bench, right? In the case of Evans and Saquon, it is what it is, right? In the case of Dak, he's on a bye next week, so I don't have a choice, right? In the case of this next player, though, the last dud for us from this week, it might be like trade him for a packet of ketchup if you could.
Literally.
Calvin Ridley doesn't catch the football. Calvin Ridley has 9 catches in 5 games this season. 9 in 5 games. He had 0 catches yesterday. There were a total of 96 wide receivers who scored a decimal of a fantasy point at least yesterday, right? So I'm not talking about guys that played but had 0 catches on 0 targets or whatever. I'm talking about the 96 receivers who had at least 0.1 fantasy points. Calvin Ridley was wide receiver 95 out of 96. 0.9 fantasy points because he had a 9-yard rush.
I was
This
just going to
offense-
say, he did carry the ball one time.
That's it.
We talked about last week. We talked about how we were doing our rankings and we were sort of drawing conclusions. And I said, Calvin Ridley and this offense are oil and water. They don't mix. It's not an offense that works at all, right?
Yeah.
And it just does not work
Just
whatsoever.
so strange.
You don't trust the offense at all. How do you trust this offense? Will Levis.
But they paid him to come there.
And I'm starting to wonder if they have buyer's remorse.
I would think so.
No.
But
like-
it's really bizarre. Like, it's one of those things where you think you're trying to optimize your offense by finding players that fit your scheme, and yet this doesn't feel right at all.
Squeaky wheel did not get the grease. Brian Callahan was saying all the right things this past week, and then Calvin really sounded off
Oh, yeah, he did.
after the game. He was pissed in front of reporters. And by the way, I get it. I'm not going to, he's making generational wealth. He's very, very much set in that department. But money can't buy you everything, including targets, apparently, right? Like, what do you do here? So it's a terrible offense. I mean, now that Drake May is in, is there any passing offense you trust less than the Titans?
Maybe the Cleveland Browns, but they're right on
Okay, so
par.
I agree. That's a good call. Like, it's probably those
They're close.
two are like very near the bottom.
The difference is one of them has a guy that you're paying, $40+ million to. The other guy is Will Levis. And with the Titans field, even if they benched Will Levis, what's the hope that it would get better with a backup? It feels like there is no semblance of hope in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, wide receiver 52 is his second best finish of the season.
Stop it.
Wide receiver 7, that game against the Jets, of course, right? He goes off against the Jets. Wide receiver 102, wide receiver 88, wide receiver 95.
It's
Calvin Ridley.
disgusting.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
He's not just a bench. If you want to drop him for someone, you can. He's
Droppable.
just unusable at
He's
this point.
droppable. Yeah, yes. We have seen players who we've said drop, and they've picked back up some value. So I get it. If you're afraid of this going in the direction that Christian Kirk went, where he went from droppable to like having a couple of good games to all of a sudden having a couple of mediocre games again.
Yep.
But Calvin Ridley, what is the value on your roster right now?
There is none. Name value. It's name value only, and that's it.
And so if you need the spot, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you, that's my general rule of thumb. For a player that's talented, I'm not going to tell you, drop him because you're pissed. I'm going to tell you, if you need a spot, if you told me that, hey, this week I'm trying to add Cam Akers because I'm not sure if Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, because I'm not sure if Aaron Jones will be available. Too early to tell, but just an example that we'll talk about more on waivers. Fine. I'm fine with adding Ty Chandler for the chance he might start over Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And for what it's worth, on tomorrow's show, obviously with it being the waiver wire, we're going to do a deep dive into all the injuries that happened this week. There was, unfortunately, a bunch of them again, Stephania, so we will have a very full day with that. I want to close the show out with this.
Okay.
Monday Night Football. We've got the Bills and the Jets. Can
cannot
we
wait
speak
for
into
this game.
existence some more volume for Breece Hall,
I think
please?
it's going to happen. They're changed their play caller. I think everyone knows it's the worst kept secret in the world that Breece Hall is being underutilized in the offense. I think this happens tonight.
Do you think that we finally see Alan Lazard unlocked in this offensive field?
Well, I don't know that you can be more unlocked than being tied for the NFL receiving touchdowns lead coming
You know what?
into
You're
the
right.
week.
You're
And
right.
Again, some people recognize greatness. Others are Mike Clay.
That's it.
what it
Mike
comes down
Clay
to.
would say, what does he say? If you like players who drop the football.
Yeah, if you like guys who drop the football, then you would love that guy.
Mike likes
Clay.
Calvin Ridley. That's what he
You
likes.
know what? It's true.
He likes
we got
square yard kings.
We got a tweet though, Field, that I saw this weekend about one of our listeners' sons or daughters. It was either a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old had
that's
said
right. I
they
said
were
you're
listening to the
wrong.
podcast and said, "Are Field and Dan actually friends with Mike Clay? Because I'm worried that all they do is just make fun of him." So we do want to say we love Mike Clay. Mike Clay is one of our best friends. We would not make fun of him if we did not love him. He is very much in on it. I don't want anyone to think that we don't like Mike Clay or that there's anything underlying with that. He's one of our best friends in the world.
I just prefer real yards to air yards.
That's it.
I'm a simple man. I like when you catch the ball.
Well, I like
And
real
also,
fantasy points rather than
I like
projected
players,
fantasy points.
even players who are older than 25 can play on my fantasy team.
You're right, Stephania. If you're looking at this, obviously we're going to hope, do we have any updates? And you can't do a lot now unless you have to go out there and grab one of the backup running backs. Any updates on James Cook, Stephania, that would change where we were at?
You got
9
to
hours
watch
out.
the pregame warm-ups. The last we heard was that his agency had told Adam Schefter that he planned on playing with the toe injury that he sustained last week.
Okay.
Bills left it as questionable, open to a game-time decision. This is probably one of those things where the player wants to play. They're like, we're going to take it to warm-ups. Let's see how you look. Let's see how you do, and we'll go from there.
Ty Johnson, the ostensible next man up, if for some reason James Cook is not available. But it's trending towards him being available, and as is the case with a guy like Michael Pittman Jr., as we saw yesterday, you don't get to decide after kickoff.
Yeah.
You get to decide before kickoff. So if James Cook plays and you still have him on your roster, or you have him on your roster, you've probably already wed yourself.
To be fair, that Michael Pittman Jr. one was like, I don't think I've seen a report of anything that was more at a 180 than what happened with that player.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Where they were talking
crazy.
about him potentially going on IR, and then
he just plays.
Playing,
Yeah,
and we can talk about it more tomorrow, but
I just meant more like once the game, you either play him or you don't. You don't get to like, oh, after one series he's played one snap, can I take him out of my lineup? No, it's you're choosing. You're married to the game, baby. Married to the game.
I don't love that. All right, let me ask you this question. If you're picking it, are you going Bills or are you going Jets with the new head coach and new play caller?
New York, actually in East Rutherford, the team that actually plays this game in New York's on the road. Bills.
I think I went with the Bills.
I'm taking the Bills.
You know what I did this week? I forgot to put in my pick.
Stephania.
I was in the 97th percentile. Don't want to brag.
Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
I won the week last week with like however many games there were. I think I went 12-2 or 13, however many games there were. I only had 2 wrong. I just voided myself out of the competition by forgetting to actually enter my picks, but I still wrote them down, and I think I took the Bills.
So far, I've only gotten 2 games wrong this week, and I am taking the Bills.
And you actually entered them into the game.
I did enter them into the game as well, yes.
So,
yeah.
Congrats to you. I'm out.
I entered my picks. I don't know how I did. I'm just not going to check because I started Dak Prescott in a league this week, and I have too much pain in my body.
Well, it'll be fun. Hey, make sure you check out Monday Night Football. Always a good time. I love the Peyton and Eli feed. I always, flip back and forth between the two. But like anytime I can watch Peyton and Eli, just go back and forth at each other like brothers. It's the best to me. It's so much fun.
When their dad was on with them, that's actually really the best. He's like, Eli, go to your room.
It's like, Dad, you can't tell me to go to my room right now. It's not how it works.
I'm
All right.
42 years old. I can't go to the room.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Today's show is presented by Boost Mobile. Love those guys. Make sure that you don't forget to love each other, be kind to yourself, have fun watching Monday Night Football, and we will see you back here tomorrow for a huge waiver wire show. We'll see you then.
Later.